Christ in capital, love God, love neighbor, build something. Let's get started. Nathan, how are you doing?
Hello, Dustin. I'm doing great. It's a
You're
beautiful
doing great.
Saturday morning.
Good. Yes, it is. I am, for the listeners, I am all alone today, daddying all alone. The wife is out of town. So I got the baby down to sleep for right now. He's in the next room. So if I'm talking quietly, well, you have kind of an understanding as to why. So anyways, what are we talking about? I think the question was, what would a distinctly Christian philosophy of capitalism look like?
Mm.
And that was something actually you posed to me first. And we let our listeners decide, which of the topics that you proposed, and that was the one. So that's where we're going. Yeah, you have anything to say before we kind of kick it off?
Well, clearly it sounds like it's relevant if most people chose to hear us talk about that specific question. And
Yeah.
I mean, today, it seems like that's a question that a lot of Christians are wrestling with, which is how committed should a Christian be to the capitalistic kind of ethos as our country is playing around with other economic models and systems. Does a Christian have a unique insight on that sort of thing? Or could there be a Christian kind of capitalism that restricts the worst parts of capitalism, but kind of builds off of the best parts?
Yeah.
So it seems like it's pretty relevant.
Yeah. And you know what I've noticed in the past couple years, the word capitalism has never really had a negative connotation to it. Well, I'm sorry. In America, it hasn't really had a huge negative connotation. But in the past couple of years, it's like it's been rebranded as a bad word, right? And that's been a quick change. It's been a really quick change. And so you see a lot of instances or a lot of scenarios where people are having to defend capitalism, which is kind of weird because of its history. You shouldn't be defending it in a sense, but we'll get into that in just a second. So just to kind of like dive in, we need to define the term. Actually, before we do that, why is it relevant? I guess we kind of already discussed that, but is it mainly just because we need to pitch, the utilitarian side of it, like capitalism's the best one, therefore it's we should pursue that one, that economic system? Or is it because God says so? God says that, which one is it? Do we do it because it's consistent with what the Bible says, or do we do it because it's helpful?
Yeah, I think right. We could probably kind of look at the question from both lenses. Like, you could look at it from the question of, is there any economic model that Christians should just across the board be more in favor of? Right? Like, or are all the economic models just from a Christian perspective equal? And then whatever economic model you're in as a Christian, you just kind of work with it. Or are there some models that Christians, we go, actually, that seems to be more in line with kind of Christian way of thinking? That could be like one way of approaching the question. And I think that's what you're getting at with does the Bible actually kind of push for a certain economic system? Yeah. Or the other way is, let's just assume we're in a capitalistic system. Can there be a Christian version of it that leads to human flourishing? Because I think there have been some good arguments that I've heard for, in this fallen world, if you're in a socialistic system, there is no way that you can actually finagle that to lead to human flourishing. It's one of the reasons why it's bad, like in its DNA.
Yeah.
Like, you can survive in it, but you cannot thrive in it. But is there a way that in a capitalistic system you actually could, with Christian principles, actually thrive in that system? Or does it actually go antithetical to Christianity? Would be kind of another way of looking at the question.
Yeah, I do think it's really important, because what you've said in the past, and I've taken this to heart, all economic systems are social at the root. They're social. I saw a chart, or wasn't sure, I was like a picture today or yesterday, and it showed a tower, okay? And there was levels on this tower, and the base of the tower was theology. The next level up was anthropology. The next level up was political philosophy, and then political system. And then on top of that was your economic philosophy, and then your economic system. And so you've got this like tower that's built up, but the foundation of it is the theological implications and the anthropological, definitions and your kind of base. And so we've got to talk about that, because it's all connected in some way. If you're going to pitch one economic system or one economic philosophy or policy, let's dig down and see, is that consistent with what you're saying about man, about theology, about God? And you can always get to the root at the end of the day, right? So it is very important, but let's define it real quick. And you're probably going to know a lot more about this than I am, but Karl Marx coined the term capitalist, right? In his Das Kapital. I don't know how to pronounce it. I always sound weird trying to pronounce it like like it should be pronounced. Yeah. So basically, he kind of set up this dichotomy between labor and capital. Capital were the wealthy people who owned all the stuff, the product, the means of production and all of this stuff, and then labor were like the workers who were being exploited by the capitalists. That's what he called them. So that's kind of the foundation of capitalists. And then I don't know how we got it to a point where it was this good thing, right? Like it had the good connotation, but it does. It does, and I don't apologize for it, because I think it's a good way of just kind of identifying the system that you're kind of holding on to. But so in your mind, Nathan, what is capitalism?
So this probably won't be a like scientific enough definition, but like an economic system that's foundations are in private property, private ownership, and free markets. So markets that have very little public ownership, or government ownership. So, and then that gets into freedom of wage labor and all sorts of things. But private property, free market, personal ownership.
Yeah, and I think that is the most important part of it, because the issue is who owns the means of production, like we were talking about with Marx. Who owns it? Who does it belong to? And then I guess before you get there, you have to define what do we mean by the means of production? What is that? Because when Marx was kind of pitching his whole idea, his philosophy, the means of production were mainly just the factories and the equipment and the people who owned the stuff that made the other stuff, right? They were the wealthy ones, right? But in a financial sense, when you look up the term capital, right, you're going to get some sort of financial definition. But you've got these various other definitions that are going to give you a broader sense of what capital means. And essentially, it's just the things that you own that you can use to further your objectives, right? The essence of the definition is ownership. Who owns the stuff? Who owns it? And I remember, you may have seen this, Nathan, but when I was in grade school, we had a civics class, and there was a poster in the room, and it had these different sections on the poster, and each section was a different economic system, and each of them kind of used this situation of two cows and the owner, right? So socialism was, you have two cows, the government takes a little bit of milk and redistributes it to other people. Communism is the government has two cows and decides who gets what. And capitalism was, you have two cows, you milk it, and you sell the milk for profit. And there was other ones on there. But I thought it was a really good kind of basic way of understanding things. And
Yeah.
everything should be able to be boiled down to simple terms like that. We should be able to do that. And I think we're going to have to do that to get to these like theological, the theological base. David Bahnsen once said, every economic transaction should be able to be spoken to in terms of two people on an island. Right?
Nice.
We have to get, you have to get there. When you're thinking about the economic transactions, you have to get there in order to make this kind of moral case, right? And you should be able to. So when we're talking about capital, the base issue is who owns the stuff, who owns the means of production. Like you said, Marx was all about factories and equipment and stuff like that. But before you can own factories, you have to save up, right? You have to use other things to build up to get those factories, right? You've got to use your own labor, your own time, your own skills, the things that God gave you, in the very first instance. Those are the things that are the base of those future capital, so to speak. And so I'm gonna make the case, maybe not today, but just throughout this whole podcast, this whole project, is that if you don't believe in capitalism, or the idea that there are private property rights and that the government doesn't have a ton of say over the individual's stuff, or unlimited, I guess. If you say that the government has unlimited access, you're basically saying that people don't have the right to their own bodies, right? They don't have the right to their own labor. And what I just gave you the definition for slavery. Right. So anyways, so let's do it. Common objections. I put this post on Instagram and I got a couple responses to what are common objections to marrying capitalism and Christianity, right? One of them was, capitalism puts profits over people, and therefore it is antithetical to Christianity. And so my first thought, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Nathan. My first thought is capitalism is a system that is amoral. I mean, it's not a person. It does not have intentions, right? It doesn't have moral agency. People do. People have moral agency, right? And if you're going to push back against capitalism as, prioritizing profit over people, it's the people that are doing that. And if your solution to that is government, well, the government is also made up of people. So, profits over people.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we have to realize is that if capitalism exposes what, like, the worst things that individuals can do with power and money, that also exposes how much worse it would be if the government had all the power and money. Right. So whatever problems there are in the human heart are compounded when people have government power behind them. They're not minimized. I think that's kind of part of the thing that we forget, is that we think, the government has more power to restrain people from evil. And in one sense they do, like through laws and police and things like that. But once the government starts to become an economic player, the government can be just as filled with greed, just as filled with desire for power and abuse and all those sorts of things. And the more power you give people in the government, the worse you're going to see that play out.
Yeah. And I hear the objection to that. The objection would be, well, but we live in a democracy where people get to decide and control the governments, the people who are in government. But you still got the issue of the 51%. If you're going with a strict democracy, you still got an idea of the 51%, lording over the 49%, any economic immorality, essentially. So you're not really getting rid of the issue by saying that, the government should have control, and we've got a democracy that kind of keeps it in check. I think history's shown us a little differently.
One other thing to that objection is that capitalism prioritizes profits over people. I think that would only be true if capitalism was prescriptive in its nature. This is what people should do. But I think the best argument for capitalism is that it's mainly descriptive. It mainly just is observing how the world actually works and says, like, let's create laws that allow people to do like what naturally already happens. Like, we all have built into us a sense of ownership. We all have built into us a sense of contractual obligations and things like that. And so capitalism, I think one of the reasons why it became like, it spread around the globe so rapidly was that it was kind of like oh, wow, like we figured out how to like live along the grain of the way that the world already kind of is supposed to operate. And look,
I remember you saying that. Yeah, exactly. I remember you saying that a while ago. You're like, you said when you're looking at capitalism and socialism, well, capitalism, you don't have to teach anyone that. Right. Socialism is what has to be taught, right? Yeah. Capitalism, you just, people own things and they can do with them as they please. Like, they can trade however they want. Yeah. And like you're saying, the utility aspect, look how what's happened. The 19th century productivity based on a capitalistic framework of economics, just like hockey sticked. So that's the utilitarian argument. It works, therefore let's do it. But we're talking about Christianity real quick. The other one was Jesus was a Marxist, socialist or a communist. That's one of the objections that many Christians would, because Marx was all about sharing with the poor and the lowly, and we could go so many places with that. I just want to encourage everyone that's listening. You need to get the book, The Maker versus the Takers by Jerry Bowyer. Go read it. Fantastic. It's not a long read. Phenomenal book. Jesus was not a Marxist. The thesis, the title is the thesis. God is in favor of the makers and not of the takers. Okay? Doesn't matter if you are taking the stuff for altruistic purposes. You're still taking. You're still stealing from people. So go read that book. We don't want to spend.
You had him on your podcast.
That's right. Yep. So episode. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember what episode it was. I should. Yeah. A couple episodes back, Jerry Bowyer was on the podcast. Great.
Put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I definitely will. Okay, and then the other one.
Hey, so could I jump on that real quick? Even though go ahead. Reading that book and listening to your episode will do the most, say the most about that. But we also, to me, this just seems to make sense. Jesus was all about giving, right? Giving requires personal ownership. The moment that the government says, actually, we own it, and we're going to allocate what you used to have to other people, you're not giving anymore. So right. You could say it this way. You could say that Jesus taught things that are similar to the ends that Marxism says it's going for, the ends being like helping the poor and keeping people from being oppressed.
Yeah.
But the means is completely different. For Jesus, the means is generosity and giving. Mm-hmm. For Marxism and communism, it's taking, right?
Yeah.
And distributing. And there is no thank you. There is no gratitude, and there's no generosity.
Yeah. So I'm an auditor. I'm an internal auditor. So we look at financial transactions and financial statements and all this stuff, and we try to identify misstatements or anything like that where there's an issue with on the face of the financials or whatever we're looking at. But that is not the purpose of our job. The purpose of the job is to identify the things underneath that are causing it, the root of the issues, right? And it blasphemous to compare Jesus to an auditor? I don't know, but but that's what Jesus is doing. He's saying, look, you could try to fix the end results all you want, but it's not going to be the solution if you can't address the thing that's causing the issue in the first place, right? So, and that's the heart issue. He says in Matthew, I think it's 15, might be, out of the heart of man comes, or out of the mouth speaks out of the abundance of the heart. You know, the heart is deceitful, wicked, you know, all that stuff. That's the issue. So, you know, Marx is trying to reach over top of that issue and try to fix the end result. That's not okay. When you're done, you basically giving yourself a never-ending task that is not gonna stop.
Right. I think the way that Ben Shapiro puts it is, with the Marxist system, it's like the government is holding a gun to your head saying, give that to your neighbor. You know, because at the end of the day, if you resist the government, you know, they're going to throw you in jail. And if you resist that, they're going to put a gun to your head. So it's like, even if you say, fine, I'll give it to my neighbor, you're only doing it because you're made to, which doesn't solve any of the hard issues. All it does is make you hate your neighbor.
Yeah, exactly. Resentment. Yeah. Okay, so the last one was love of money being the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take on that? So I agree. The love of money is the root of all evil. Jesus said it. So,
well, he actually said root of all kinds of evil.
That's right. We talked about that with Jerry, I think. Maybe I'm getting my conversation mixed up. But So what does he mean by that? Does he just mean like all sorts of sins are based in the love of money?
Yeah, I think so. And money being mammon, so not just like dollars, but material possessions and wealth. And you can see that. I mean, you can see that even back at the garden, like Eve looked at the fruit and she saw that it was desirable for the eyes and looked tasty, and she wanted to have it so she could be wise. So that's mammon right there. Desire for the created thing over the creator. Idolatry, that's the definition, is the worship of the created thing over the creator. So if you like dug all the way down, you could say that in some senses, the love of the created thing is the root of all evil, or most evils out there.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, our human proclivity is to try to find security and satisfaction in wealth and in what we possess in various ways. And so I do think that the capitalistic system provides ample freedom for that sinful bent, that sinful proclivity to run wild. There's nothing within the DNA of capitalism that encourages people not to be greedy.
Right.
And so I think that's absolutely legitimate.
Okay.
Of course, one question would be, is there any economic system that would actually keep people from being greedy?
Right. Yeah. Your solution is not any better than what you're saying, falsely claiming about capitalism. Yeah. So those are some of the common issues. Another one was, there's a lot of people that get upset about the profit, people gaining profit for life necessities like healthcare, water, food, stuff like that. I was reading this week, or I posted something this week. It was Proverbs 11, and it says, "Blessed is the man who," I'm paraphrasing, but blessed is the man. A curse is on the man who holds back grain. Blessed is the man who sells it. Sells it,
right?
Not gives it away.
Yeah,
who sells it.
Right. There's actually an admonition in the Old Testament that if there is a famine or a siege or something, do not keep your grain to yourself while you watch your neighbor dying. But then it does say, what do you do instead? You sell it to your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I'm wondering the context for that. Like back then, I'm sure famine was a scary thing. Like that was something that was always on people's minds, like what if kind of thing. So the tendency is like hold back, hold it in, keep it to yourself. You know that uh, there's food there if you ever get into trouble. But the Bible's like, but if you see other people struggling, sell it to them, right? Don't just give it away, sell it. Like,
Mhm.
you know, um, yeah,
And and it creates the freedom. Like you can give it away if you'd like, but you don't have to, because if that becomes part of the law, you must give. It's no longer a gift, and
right,
right. So,
yeah,
and you see it with um, Joseph. He becomes second command in Egypt, and he says, "Store up all this grain because the famine's coming." And then the famine comes, and then they sell the grain to all the people in Egypt.
yeah,
But then he has the freedom to give the grain to his brothers, secretly, right? So they pay for it, and then he puts the money back in their bags.
right,
He's got the freedom to do that, but I don't read that it was somehow evil for him to sell the grain during times of famine.
right, yeah, yeah.
And of
That
course, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that whole story with Joseph. Um, there's a lot packed in there. A lot of gospel. Um, I don't know, shadows, I guess, or foreshadowing in there.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, okay. So let's compare and contrast. So a lot of times on this podcast, what we'd like to do is we like to hold up a socialist or a centrally planned economy against capitalism and do that comparison. But what we want to do here is look at Christian capitalism versus the secular capitalist. So we're doing kind of an internal critique. The first thing I wanted to hit on is the idea of ownership. Like we were discussing, that's the root of the capitalist definition. Who owns what? And ultimately, Psalm 24 says that God owns everything. He owns it all, right? Everything is his. And so everything that we have is we're stewarding it. We're using it. I mean, he gives us ownership. He says, here's your stuff. Here, this stuff, go and do. But that's the base. God owns the stuff, right? When you get into a secular argument, the secular defense of capitalism, the question is going to come up, well, if you go back far enough, at some point someone conquered someone else to get the stuff, right?
Right.
And that's a big issue, right? That has caused a lot of social justice issues today, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the root of the what do they call it, imperialist, or the what's the famous word? Not imperialist. Starts with a C. Anyways, you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
We're imperialists. We take stuff. We conquer people. We get their stuff,
Oh,
and then therefore there's colonialism. Yes,
yeah.
Thank you very much. But that's a big thing.
Right,
But
most private property can be traced back to theft at some point.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, historically, in some ways, that's true,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue against that. The real question, of course, being, does that have any bearing whatsoever now? It's like,
yeah, can you unscramble the egg, essentially?
right, like, yeah. Let's steal from you to right the wrong of your ancestor 20 generations back who stole from somebody else. I don't think theft can somehow mitigate theft.
Yes, exactly. Two rights don't make it wrong.
Yeah, but I do love that that's how you started pitting, God owns everything fundamentally versus simply I own stuff. This is mine and mine alone. Because if it's mine and I'm under some sort of belief that I earned it, I get to do whatever I want with it, that already sets you on the wrong trajectory. So when you start making decisions about your money, it often can be rooted in selfishness and possessiveness. Whereas the way Scripture puts it is, this is yours, you do own it, but it was a gift from God, and He encourages you, and in some ways requires you to give to others. First, that the 10%, the first fruits of your harvest, you give back to God, and then also look for ways to be generous.
Yeah.
And that's rooted in divine ownership.
Exactly.
Not rooted in, well, nobody owns anything. Yeah,
right. Right. Yeah. And I think that leads into the next one. The next point is that the basic biblical framework is the garden narrative. And the garden narrative was not the posture of Adam was not to be survive. You need to survive. The posture of Adam was go out, subdue the earth. It's a proactive conquering of the land, subduing the land, bringing out its full glory, the way that God intends for it to be kind of molded and shaped and beautified and all that stuff. And it's not just hoard of this stuff, survive because you're, the Bible doesn't say this, but you're not a protoplasm bouncing around in the universe, right? That you just need, it's survival of the fittest kind of thing. And that's not the base of what we're doing here. We are go-getters, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so think about it that way. I don't think you can, when you take the capitalistic framework and you're kind of comparing the Christian version versus the secular version, the secularist is going to be like, let me figure out how I can allocate these resources so that I can make the most amount of money to provide a good life for me and my family. Whereas a Christian framework would be, let me go and see how good of a return I can get on this so that I can do this really awesome, cool thing over here to better the world, to provide for people, all of that kind of stuff. And if we're comparing a socialist, I know we're doing kind of an internal critique between Christian capitalism and regular capitalism or secular capitalism. But if you look at a socialist government, that's definitely just defensive. It's defensive. It's survival. Mm-hmm. Coincidentally, it also doesn't help people survive. So, but yeah, that's the idea. The garden narrative is maybe I'm using this term wrong, a meta narrative. I don't know. It's the overarching narrative of history. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
The other one was, it is based on Leave Me Alone, which I think we kind of have addressed that in the past couple, or in past episodes. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So, well, the way I think of it is there are two types of freedom. There's the freedom to do whatever I want, and there's the freedom to do good. So the freedom to do whatever I want is kind of can lead to the leave me alone, let me do my own thing. It leads to the keep out signs on your property. It leads to the I want the government and my neighbor out of my business as much as possible sort of mentality. Mm-hmm. Whereas the freedom to do good idea is that you are not coerced in any way that keeps you from fulfilling your obligations to your neighbor and your obligations to yourself. So you do have obligations to yourself. It's one of the interesting things that Simone Weil talks about in her Need for Roots is that when she's comparing rights and obligations, she says, obligations are more fundamental than rights because if a man was alone on an island, he would no longer have rights, but he would still have obligations. He'd have an obligation to himself to survive, right? To feed himself, to protect himself, right? So with the freedom to do good paradigm, you have obligations to yourself to protect yourself and provide for yourself and your family. And you have the freedom to do that, and that is a good thing. But you also have the freedom to give, to decide for yourself how you're going to allocate your resources to expand the kingdom of God, to better your society, to, do things for the common good. So I think if you're looking at it, why would a Christian get excited about capitalism? Capitalism provides the freedom to do good. One of the things that Simone Weil talks about is that a society fundamentally needs to be ordered, and the way that she defines order is that people are able to fulfill their obligations to others and themselves without there ever being a contradiction, without there ever being a time when they have to choose between two competing obligations. Like, I've got to provide for my family, and also I have to be generous to my neighbor, which is what you get in the socialistic system, where people are starving and all their food is being taken away from them in order to give to other people, and they're not even able to provide for their own families, right? So
Right.
in the freedom to do good model, you can fulfill as much as possible. You can fulfill all your obligations to yourself and your neighbor. But the thing with capitalism is, if you're not thinking it from a Christian perspective, you're just seeing freedom as the freedom to do what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. But then, yeah, I've heard pastors talk about that. Ultimate freedom is the ability to pursue that which is, I may be screwing this up, but pursue that which is best. And then you got to determine what is best. Because like you're saying, there could be contradictions. You've got, I can do whatever I want, whatever my will wants me to do. That sounds kind of weird. My will wants me to do. But you've got other things over here that your will also wants you to do.
Yeah.
So it's like you've got that bind there. Which one am I going to do? My flesh or my immediate desires want this thing, but kind of underneath that, I also want this over here that's in direct contradiction to that thing. So
can I just say, and maybe this will make me sound cranky, but I think this is an example of why income tax is so bad. So federal income tax has not really been a thing until like the beginning of the 1900s.
yeah.
And for most of human history, taxes were understood to be something that, and there are exceptions, but you're taxed on your purchases, the things that you buy, right? So you earn a wage, and that's your money, and you have the freedom to do whatever you want with that money, as long as you're not hurting other people. And then if you choose to use that money to spend on stuff for yourself, you get taxed for it. And that's your choice. I want to buy this loaf of bread, and I know that it's going to be list price plus 10% or whatever, and that's your choice. But if you instead wanted to take that money and give it to somebody, the government doesn't have a right to tax you on money that you're going to give, right? So what ends up happening is we have less freedom to do good because I get taxed before I even get a choice as to how I'm going to use that money.
Right.
And then they say, oh, well, then if you want to give, whatever you give could be tax deductible, but that's after I already get it in my pocket. And we try to, mitigate it with like, you can itemize your deductions, or you could get a standard deduction, and that could try to help you out in some ways. And that's better than nothing. But at the end of the day, I should have the freedom to do what I want with my money. And if I choose to spend it on myself, tax me, absolutely, tax me for that. But if I choose instead to give it to my church or something like that, I shouldn't be taxed on the front end.
Right.
And the same should go for, well, we could get into that. We could talk. We have a whole podcast on taxes, but
yeah, no, for real. You started saying that, and I was like, my mind's going, okay. But I am going to try to connect it real quick. So the taxation part, the issue is that we think that the government or the ruling authority knows best how to allocate those resources than the people who are actively engaged in their communities, right? We're basically saying, I don't know what's best. I don't know how best to use these resources in my community. They do. I'll send it thousands of miles away. Let them determine what's best, and then send it back if they send it back. And which gets to the issue, okay? Because the objection is going to be, well, most people don't care for their communities and don't want to provide, do all that. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're back at the heart issue. We're back at the heart issue, which you're not going to solve with government intervention. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And even if, just thinking about it in terms of stewardship, I mean, we all make decisions sometimes to give money to an expert to do better with that money than we would. But when we take our money and give it to the government, quote unquote, so that they can do it, use it better than we would be able to, it passes through so many hands that, and I'm not sure the exact percentage, but the way I kind of envision it is you give the government $100 to help your community because you don't know how to do it. And it passes through a dozen hands before it actually gets used. And that $100 is whittled down to about 20. Mm-hmm. And then that 20 gets used for something.
Exactly.
It's like, is that really even good stewardship?
Right. Administrative fees will destroy you. And then one of the last ones was this idea that work is essential to our humanity. It most certainly is. And I think if we're doing the internal critique, Christian capitalism versus secular capitalism, like I said, secular capitalism is going to be, how can I make this return, get the most return I can so that I can, it's a defensive thing. I can keep for myself, I can provide for my family, that sort of thing. And regardless of whether or not that return or anything is married to any sort of purpose or meaning about what the world is, what we're doing here, what humanity is, all of that. Christian capitalism or Christianity provides that foundation that says you're a human being made in God's image. You're meant to reflect him. Like we've mentioned in the past, we are not only the image of God, but we're required to imitate God as well. And in that, we are called to be creators, workers, doers, builders, glorifying the world, or not glorifying the world, but beautifying and glorifying God in the world, and representing him. And one of the things I've heard recently that I thought was really fascinating was that the thing that these like lockdowns and government subsidies do is they strip people of their human dignity. It strips people of the purpose that they have in their lives. What if you're sitting on your couch every day and you're getting a stipend from the government or some sort of like subsidy from the government? There's no meaning there. There's no purpose. You are a bump on a log, just surviving, right? And that's all you're going to do. You're just going to survive, maybe, if that's what you're depending on. People can't live that way. People cannot live that way. You have to have a meaning or a purpose in life. That's why these billionaires do so well, I think, because they have a vision of where they want to go. Right. Obviously, most of the time it's not Christian, but the idea is that they're working for something that's bigger than just their paycheck. They're not just trying to survive. They're trying to do something that's proactive, progressive. Again, Christians should be the most progressive ones. Just saying. Right.
Absolutely. I will give one example of Christian capitalism versus kind of secular capitalism. So secular capitalism, the value system is all messed up. So if you think about just strictly secular capitalism sticking to the DNA of capitalism, the value system places profits kind of on top, as long as you're not like, hurting people. Profit. So if you say you're selling a house or renting out a house, we'll say you're renting out a house, you're going to try to make it as expensive as possible that's still competitive in the market to get a renter in there. And everyone's like, yeah, absolutely, sure. Nobody questions that because that's kind of the chief value. So if all the comparable houses in the area are renting out for $1,800 a month, you're going to put it on there for $1,800 or maybe $1,850, see if somebody bites, and then you kind of drop it down.
Yeah.
But a Christian capitalist says, I have the freedom to do that. And if I did that, that would not be wrong. But if, say, a needy family comes and, they've got 3 kids and they can only pay $1,700 a month, I have the freedom to choose to rent it to them under market value because there is a higher value than simply profits.
Right.
You don't have to do that. The government's not making me do that. The government isn't capping the limit of what I can, rent out my place for.
Yeah.
But I have the freedom to not make profit my highest value.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that happens all the time. People make it sound like everybody's out to just get the highest profit. And unless the government puts regulations on, how much you can rent a place out for, everyone's just going to put it out there for top dollar. And that's just not the case. A lot of people are willing to rent out to others for lower than market value because they're generous, because they care about people, because they have a relationship with that person or whatever. Happens all the time. People don't talk about that. But so again, the problem then isn't with capitalism, it's with a secular view of capitalism rather than a Christian view of capitalism. Now, as Christians, we can often adopt a secular view of capitalism and make profits our highest priority. And God has a lot to say about that. But that's what the individual chooses to do. It's not the system. The system, you can go either way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's a good distinction to make because in one sense, the libertarian or the secular conservative who holds to capitalism as a good system is going to say, okay, well, if everyone's going for the top dollar and the market price is driving, the market and everyone's going based on that, well, the more competitive it is, or the more return you're getting that businesses or housing, people, renters are getting, the more money's going to come into the market, the more opportunities are come into the market, and therefore prices can drop a little bit. But you're always going to have some people, and it's a necessity, that are willing to do that, right? Are willing to say, look, there's something else here other than a dollar value market price that should kind of be incorporated here into the market, and that would, it's going to help people who are less fortunate, all of that kind of thing. But yeah, there needs to be a component where Christians, I'm just saying Christians, people who are redeemed, who are saved, who have been remade, are new creations, pick up on that, and they're playing that part of the market rather than just the dollar amount. So, yeah. Any last things you wanted to cover on? Is there anything we missed? Probably, but
I'm sure we did. I mean, hopefully the listeners will let us know.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I think my main takeaway is capitalism isn't in its nature Christian. And you can be a good Christian in any economic system. Paul talks about that, right? I mean, in wealth or in poverty, we can learn to be content. But if we're thinking about societies flourish more in certain economic systems than others. And if we're thinking about the freedom to do good, certain economic systems give us more freedom to do good than others. And I think capitalism gives us that freedom. And Christians, I think we need to be less focused on how do we change the system to get Christian ends, and more focused on how do we actually be Christians within this system. And so many people are sitting back saying, oh yeah, the government needs to start helping all these people. And well, what are you doing with your economic freedom right now to help people?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. How about you take the freedom that you've been given in this economic system and take a look at your capital and start doing something with it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the love God, love neighbor, build something principle.
Exactly.
What are you doing with your capital? Are you just storing it up? Because scripture talks about that. People who just build storehouses store up more and more money to protect themselves for the future. That's not Christian capitalism right there.
Right.
But how are you putting your capital to use?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. I think that's a perfect way to end. And I think it's not, just to add on to that thought, it's not wrong to push for a specific economic system, right? Your primary focus should be on you. How are you resembling or kind of, embodying the economic system that you want in the individual instance? And then secondarily, push for more freedom in economics. The thing that's more consistent with the biblical idea than others. That's the one that you want to push for. But like what Nathan is saying, it has to start with you. It has to start in the first instance, the self, the individual, and then the family, community, and then grow out from there. You're not going to change the government overnight. It's not going to happen, right?
No.
It's what is it? Mustard seed to large tree, stone to a mountain, leaven in a lump of dough, which is a kind of a weird analogy, seeing as how leaven is not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, but anyways.
Yeah.
All right. Love it. Anything else? Last thoughts, Nathan? Nope.
God, love neighbor, build something.
Perfect. Where's the button? Stop. There you go. The button was covered up. Oh gosh, hold on.